I'm going to use that dreaded term that we all love so much from Jed Hoyer's mouth, exceeding expectations. There are 3 players on the Cubs team that if they exceed expectations the way that I think they can, this is a surefire playoff team. Let me show you. Hey, what's going on, Setup Nation? A little bit of optimism today as we talk about exceeding expectations. It's a fun term that, of course, we've come to know and love so much about Jed Hoyer and company. But when I actually look at this really puts into perspective just how simply the Cubs can achieve what I think they need to achieve in order to win the NL Central. Now, before we get into that, I do want to let you know we're going to do projections later this week. And I want to ask for your help, your input as a Setup Nation fan to submit your pick to click. What you're going to do, as we've always done in the past, is I'm going to have you take a video of yourself and submit it to Kyle@setupman.net. Keep it under 30 seconds. Pick one player. And if you want to do 2, that's okay. But if you do a second player, make sure that if number 1 is a position player, then number 2 is a pitcher. So I want you to do a pick to click, meaning they're going to have the best year of their career, or they're going to be one of the best players unexpectedly on this team, and why. So if it's Kyle Tucker, which I think we all know he's going to be probably the best Cub, but if he's going to have one of the best seasons of his career, you say Kyle Tucker's my pick to click, and here is why I think that. Keep it under 30 seconds. You're going to take a video from your phone, submit it to Kyle@setupman.net. Now, here's the deal. With this episode, I'm going to talk about what I think it's going to take for the Cubs to win the NL Central based on a wins number. Now, last year, they won it with, they meaning the Brewers, won it with 93 games. And this year, I think it's probably going to take less than that. Almost every single team, aside from the Reds, got worse this offseason. So really, I mean, an 88-win team probably wins the NL Central if you're looking at it. But of course, the Brewers are always super surprising. So for that reason, we're just going to go ahead and say 93 wins, once again, is what it's going to take for the Cubs to win the NL Central. That's not the point to be argued here. The point really is, how are we going to get to 93 wins? And especially given the fact that, of course, you look at the PECOTA projections, they've got the Cubs at 91.5 wins. Now, that doesn't seem so far away. However, I'm going to go based on a calculation that I'm coming to, and that is WAR. Wins above replacement. If you're not familiar with wins above replacement, this is on your screen talking about it right now, and you can see WAR is calculated by comparing a player's performance to that of a replacement level player. This represents a player who is readily available, such as a minor leaguer or a bench player. Now, what that means is a replacement level player is essentially not going to help the team a ton, but they're also not going to hurt the team, meaning they have a 0 WAR. So when you look at Pete Crow-Armstrong's WAR last year, according to FanGraphs, which is to me the most accurate, at 2.7, that means he, above a average replacement player, helped the team win 2.7 more games than that replacement player. With me so far, you probably already know what WAR is. This might be review. I apologize if it is, but I want to make sure everyone's on the same page here. Now, moving on here, the concept of a replacement level player is standardized. A key standard that is used is that the replacement level is equal to a .294 winning percentage. By the way, this explanation that I'm going over right now was sent to us by Setup Man crew member Sean Hendrickson. So thank you, Sean, because I was trying to figure out, how do you calculate this? Like, what is a 0 WAR team look like? And it's, of course, way better than the White Sox. I can say that. But a 0 WAR team essentially is a .294 winning percentage. And if you do the math on that, that's 47.6 and some change wins. Now, if you also look at, which we're going to show in a little bit here, the FanGraphs projections of the estimated Cubs 26-man roster, they're right around 41 WAR. So if you add 41 WAR to 47.6, then you get 88.6 is the number. So when you look at that, that kind of comes into alignment with a lot of like the Vegas odds. You see Vegas odds at around 87.5, some of them down to 85.5. You've heard some other sites say around 88.5. And so we're going to use the 88.5 number, not the PECOTA rankings of 91.5. We're using 88.5 and saying we need to get this team to 93 wins. So we essentially need to add 4.5 WAR somehow within the 26-man roster. So I'm going to take just 3 players and say that if they have exceptional seasons, they themselves will project the Cubs to a 93.5 win team. So let me share my screen. We're going to use 3 different websites here. Number 1 is going to be FanGraphs with projections plus what they were last year from a WAR total. Number 2 is going to be Baseball Savant, just looking at essentially what is this player good at, what could they improve on. And then number 3 is going to be Baseball Reference to look at some trends, some streaks that they went through throughout the season in this last year of 2024. Let's get to it. And make sure that you actually stay to the end when I talk about 3 players that are not on the estimated 26-man roster that could equal the same 4.5 WAR or more if they end up being on the team and having a huge impact. So stay to the end for that. All right, let's have some fun. Now, again, what we're looking at is the projected WAR. So these are 2025 projections. We're going to look at the 3 players that I believe are going to have the biggest impact for the Cubs in terms of the amount of additional WAR I think they could potentially bring the team. So when I say all of this, I'm not saying, well, who had a bad season last year and who's going to have a great season this year, and for that reason, they're going to be that difference maker. No, I'm actually just looking at the WAR here. So when I see guys like Ian Happ at 3.1, and then last year, I believe Ian Happ, let's see, was he a 3.5? Ian Happ in 2024 was a 3.6 WAR player. Now, do I think Ian Happ has the potential to be a 4.5 WAR player? I do, but the history shows that Ian Happ is consistently a 3 to 3.5 WAR player. So for that reason, he's steady. Kyle Tucker. Now, I think Kyle Tucker has a chance to be an 8 WAR player. I really do. However, the history, once again, does not show in the favor that Kyle Tucker is going to be much over 5 WAR. So, especially given the fact that that's putting a lot of pressure on one guy, I want to kind of spread this out a little bit and talk about guys that are maybe a little bit earlier on in their career that do have a chance to make a bigger impact. So for that reason, I'm putting Kyle Tucker kind of like Ian Happ in that steady category. Seiya Suzuki, 2.2. Last year, Seiya was actually, I think, around, again, a 3.5. Let's see. Seiya Suzuki in 2024 was 3.6, just like Ian Happ. So for that reason, there's a decent gap there. But I'm also putting Seiya in that steady category once again due to 2 factors. One, he's continued to show that he is probably going to be out for 30-plus games with injuries. And number 2 is that he's just never really broken past into that superstar category. So while I do think he will be at 3.5, that's not a big enough gap to me to be able to put him in the next one. Michael Busch is going to be one of our wild card players. Why? Because Michael Busch last year was a 2.3 WAR player, and I believe he has the opportunity to be maybe even a 4 WAR player if he takes the next steps, and you'll see why here in a second. Dansby Swanson, I'm going to put in that steady category. Nico Horner, steady. Pete Crow-Armstrong is number 2 at 2.9. I think Pete Crow-Armstrong has the opportunity to be a 4.5 WAR player. You'll see why here in a second. Matt Shaw, because he has 0 history in the MLB, and he's actually expected to be a 2.3 WAR player, which to me is pretty wild for a rookie who's never seen a major league pitch. They're already putting him above Seiya Suzuki, above Michael Busch, above Miguel Amaya in terms of the WAR, the wins above replacement that he's going to bring the Cubs. I think that's bold. I think that's actually extremely bold. So for that reason, I don't think there's a bigger ceiling. I think there might be more of a floor around 1.2. This is a guy that you don't know what to expect. I hope he does extremely well. I hope he's a rookie of the year, but we don't know. Miguel Amaya is number 3. So you'll notice every single one of ours, and by the way, Miguel Amaya, last year, a 0.7 WAR, according to FanGraphs, 1.2 here. I think Miguel Amaya could be a 1 or a 2.5 to 3 WAR player. And once again, I'll show you that why in a minute. Now, you'll notice I did this all with position players. Why did I do it with position players and not with pitchers? Well, essentially, pitchers, your best pitcher being Shota Imanaga last year, who had an all-star season, was phenomenal, had one of the best pitching seasons in recent history that I could think of, was only given a 3.0 WAR, along with Justin Steele, 3.0 WAR. That was our leading pitchers last year in 2024. So the opportunity for those guys to go from a 3 to a 4.5 or a 5 WAR is very unlikely. You're talking about a Cy Young type of season from both of them. And even then, you might not be looking at that big of a difference in WAR from 24 to 25. So for these reasons, I picked position players. And then, of course, in terms of your bullpen, you're never going to see guys over 2 WAR. If they do get over 2 WAR, then you've got a Tanner Scott on your team, a Josh Hader in his prime, that kind of person. So Ryan Presley is expected to lead the way in WAR. No surprise given the fact that he's probably going to be the closer, and he doesn't even reach a 1 WAR. So once again, could a variety of these guys, including the bench guys, turn into that additional 4.5 WAR? Absolutely. But I think we can get out of Michael Busch, Pete Crow-Armstrong, and Miguel Amaya an extra 4.5 wins from their projected WAR, which is going to be totaled up here in just a second. So let's go one by one. Michael Busch in 2024 was a 2.3 WAR player. He had a WRC plus of 119, meaning he was 19% better in production as an offensive player than the average player, 19% better. He had a slugging of 440 and on-base percentage of 335. Add that together, you got a 775 OPS. He had 21 home runs. He played in 152 games. What did Michael Busch do really well last year? Now we're looking at Baseball Savant, and once again, his projections in 2025 are that he's going to go from a 2.3 WAR player to a 1.9 WAR player. Now, why would he go down? Well, if you look at Baseball Savant, you get the idea of why. Because aside from his chase rate and his walk rate and his barrel rate, which were all 76 percentile or higher, everything else is actually pretty low. His expected batting average was 217. He hit 248. His expected batting average was 217. So when you look at these things, this is a wild card. This is a guy that could take you. And by the way, when I say wild card and these three guys, not only do they have the potential to make the season for the Cubs be a playoff season, they have the potential to break the season for the Cubs. These guys have an opportunity to have a worse year than last year, and that would be detrimental to the Cubs' opportunities to make the playoffs. I think these three guys have the biggest weight on their shoulder based on what we're looking at, because when you look at Michael Busch, what if he hits 217 in 2025? That's going to be wildly detrimental to our first base position. Of course, Justin Turner with the backup at first base, you have a little bit of some breathing room there. But Michael Busch is the guy. Jed Hoyer has said he's the guy. He's our future Gold Glove winning first baseman. And that is why I think he could be a 4.5 potentially, but really more along 3.5 to 4 WAR players where I'm putting Michael Busch. So the way that he does this is, number one, his fielding. You can see outs above average, 1. His arm strength, of course, it's in the first percentile. I'm not worried about his arm strength. I'm worried about his glove over at first base. In the month of April, Michael Busch was a liability at first base. May, he got better, and then from June on, he was one of the best first basemen in the league. So I automatically think that the outs above average for Michael Busch is going to go from 1 to probably 5 or 6 in 2025. Now, from an offensive standpoint, here's the thing about Michael Busch, and I've got Baseball Reference up right here. And by the way, if you aren't familiar with Baseball Reference, you can go to these game logs in any season for this player, and you can highlight the lines that you want to add up the totals. And so what I'm going to go to, and I've got this documented here, May 25th until July 11th. May 25th until July 11th, as that calculates, you will see that Michael Busch had a batting average of 333, an on-base percentage of 429, a slugging percentage of 542. That's tremendous. Take that all day long. The OPS was 970 during that time. He hit 5 home runs. That right there is, of course, he's a streaky hitter. That's what we've learned. He's a streaky hitter. But 39 games, he was the best offensive player on this team. Now, what really sucks is what happened after July 11th. From July 12th to the end of the season, as we're highlighting that, you're going to see some pretty rough numbers pop up here. In 65 games, he hit .211, an on-base percentage of .292, and a slugging percentage of .386. That's an OPS of .678. And during that time, still hit 9 home runs, so he still was a threat at the plate. This guy had a good season at the plate. Michael Busch, in his first full season in the major leagues, had just under 500 at-bats and hit 21 home runs with a .248 batting average. If you can take that, plus add on better defense, this becomes a guy that is, and maybe you ask for a little bit less streaky, just a little bit more consistency, but I don't think you're going to get that. I think he's still going to be a streaky hitter. If you can have a guy like this who has the same type of offensive profile from 2024, but add on the better defense throughout the entire season of 2025, I think you're adding on minimum 1 WAR, but I think this could be a 4 WAR player. I absolutely think Michael Busch could be a 4 WAR player. And what does that mean? That means that if you take the 1.9 and add on as the projection 2.1 WAR, that's massive. But I'm going to be completely conservative, and I'm going to put this at a 3.5. If Michael Busch can be a 3.5 WAR player, again, I'm saying I think it's possible to be a 4 WAR player, but I'm going to say if he becomes a 3.5 WAR player, then that is 1.6 above his projections. Follow me. Remember, the goal is 4.5. We're already 1/3 of the way there at 1.6. Our next guy, Crow-Armstrong. In 2024, he had a 2.7 WAR season, which, by the way, was only in 123 games. And, by the way, was with a below-average WRC plus at 87, meaning he was 13% worse than the average Major League hitter. 237 average, 10 home runs, on base of only 286, and a slug of 384. He's projected in 2025, for some reason, to only play 130 games, which just doesn't make any sense to me. This is a young guy, hasn't dealt with injuries. Not sure why he wouldn't be in all 162, maybe a few days off. Home run 16, average 246, on-base percentage 300, and a WRC plus essentially of 98, which comes out to a 2.9 WAR player. Now, I'm going to focus heavily on playing time for this one, because if Crow-Armstrong only plays in 130 games, then yeah, right around a 3 WAR is probably what you're expecting. But I think Crow-Armstrong is going to play in 155 games, and if you take an average player at the dish, which is essentially what they're saying he's going to be a 98 WRC plus, only 2% lower than the average productive Major League batter. I think you're looking at a 5 WAR player. I'm not scared to say that. Now, once again, I want to be a little bit conservative, so I'm going to go back into a 4.5 WAR. But look at this for a second. At Baseball Savant, I mean, the things that stick out to you, you're always looking for the red. Phenomenal fielder, phenomenal sprint speed. 99th percentile in sprint speed. Outs above average, 97th percentile. Arm value, 98th percentile. Arm strength, 96th percentile. This is at the end of the day, elite, once in a generation type of base runner and fielder for the Chicago Cubs. That's why people are so excited about him. Now, take a look at the batting. It's horrendous. Now, we are looking out over an entire season, but if we all remember, August and September and a little bit of July was just really fun with Crow-Armstrong. We'll go over those numbers in a second. He's in the bottom 50th percentile of every single offensive category. For those of you that are listening on the podcast, it's a lot of blue. We don't like blue. I mean, I'll just go over a few of them. Chase rate, 2%. Walk rate, 11%. Expected batting average, 13%. It's rough to see. It's rough to see. But he still was a 2.7 WAR player. That tells you how freaking good this guy's base running and defense is. And the fun stuff. Let's go to Baseball Reference. Crow-Armstrong in 123 games last year. Again, the offensive numbers were fine. But in his first 70 games, as we go down to game number 70, you'll see it here. 188 average, 235 on-base percentage, 304 slugging. That is a horrendous OPS of 539. What happened after that? July 31st until the end of the season, that was 53 games, a 287 batting average, a 338 on-base percentage, a 470 slug, and 808 OPS. 7 home runs, 2 triples, 8 doubles. And, by the way, 46 strikeouts to 12 walks. So he basically went 4-1. I'm just curious now. Now I want to look at. So 4-1 strikeout to walk ratio in his first 70 games. What did that look like? Let's wait to see. I didn't look this one up. I was just curious. So basically a 5.5 to 1. So he cut down the strikeouts and he increased the walks. That's a good trend. He 52 strikeouts to 9 walks in his first 70 games. If Pete Crow-Armstrong puts up these numbers, we're going back to FanGraphs. And by the way, Baseball Savant, if you take that second half, that changes a lot of this blue. I'm not saying a lot of it becomes red, but it becomes a little bit of orange, a little bit of light red. If he can be that type of player that puts up, as FanGraphs says, 246 average, 300 on base percentage, slugging of 408, if he's automatically on base more often and plays more games, because again, I'm leaning heavily on playing time on this one. If he plays in 150 to 155 games at a 300 on base percentage, this guy steals 40 bags. This guy hitting 16 home runs at probably the bottom of the lineup is massive. A OPS of 708 for a guy who is mainly going to be the biggest value of defense is massive. This would be the Dansby Swanson of the outfield. Dansby Swanson has had regularly with the Cubs 4.5, close to 5 WAR seasons. That's why I think Pete Crow-Armstrong is in the same category, because if he is the same offensive profile as Dansby Swanson, which we haven't been as excited about, but plays the elite defense that I would argue to say is even better than Dansby Swanson in the outfield. I know that's aggressive, but I think we're going to see that this year. Then you're looking to me at a 4.5 WAR player. Projected 2.9, add on another 1.6. We're at 3.2. We only need 1.3, guys. We're getting there. We're getting there. Miguel Amaya, number 3, and this is where I think we get that that extra 1.3. And he is projected for a 1.2. In 2024, he was a .7 WAR player, 83 WRC plus, slugging 357, on base 288, average 232. He hit 8 home runs. He played in 117 games. Miguel Amaya was the worst player on the Cubs, hands down, for the first 65 games of the season. In the first 65 games of the season, as we're going to see here on my screen, you are looking at a player that hit 190 with a on-base of 250, with a slug of 263. That's an OPS of 513. And oh, by the way, guys are running left and right on him. He had, I believe, somewhere around 5 or 6 catcher interferences in that time alone. I mean, the amount of games that he lost for the Cubs to start the season by himself. I can name 2 games, once against the Giants and once against the Brewers, catcher's interference that led to the Cubs losing that game. That's 2 games right there. I don't remember when the Giants game was. It might have been later in the season. But the catcher interference thing was actually a real thing. Add on to that the fact that he was hitting 190. He was basically an automatic out. Might as well have had John Lester back in there hitting in his spot. This guy was hurting the Chicago Cubs, and unfortunately, with Yan Gomes, the way that he played unexpectedly, it was a situation that the Cubs were not expecting. But my point here is that from July 12th, which we're going to go to the end of the season, Miguel Amaya was actually one of the best Cubs players in terms of an offensive profile. Still wasn't throwing guys out. He improved the catcher's interference. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head right now, but I do know that became a lot better. He figured that out. He worked on that. But in his final 52 games, he hit 282 on base, 333, slugging, 470. OPS of 803. This guy went from a bottom of the barrel. I wouldn't be surprised if in his first 70 games or first 65 games, he was a close to -2 WAR player, and he ended up being a positive WAR player by the end of the season, 0.7. Now you're probably looking at this stuff and you're saying, well, Kyle, you're expecting this guy to go, and you're expecting Michael Busch and Crow-Armstrong and Miguel Amaya to do all these things. You're basing it off of their best part of the season, and these are streaky hitters, 100%. Baseball is all about streaks. You're going to have guys that are injured. You're going to have guys that aren't playing well. Look at Cody Bellinger. Streakiest seasons, streakiest career probably of any player in recent history. So I'm relying heavily on not just them doing better from an offensive profile, but also just the fact of they played so poorly. Michael Busch had one of the worst ends to the season. Crow-Armstrong had one of the worst starts to a career. Miguel Amaya was one of the worst players on the Cubs to start the season. Now, I'm just saying, if that just went from, holy cow, that was abysmal, to just like, hey, this guy's kind of rough right now, but, I guess he is still serviceable. Just even that, and then you add on the fact that they had these hot streaks and put those hot streaks in there, that's where I think that these guys can do this. So, once again, Miguel Amaya, looking at his baseball savant, which, by the way, might surprise you. I know it surprised me. Blocks above average, 12. That's in the 98th percentile. I guess just because of the framing, the pop time, the catcher's interference stuff, you just automatically think like, oh man, he's rough. But the blocks, he blocks a lot of balls, so that's good. His baseball savant, once again, like Pete Crow-Armstrong, not as bad as Pete Crow-Armstrong, kind of surprisingly, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these are under the 50th percentile. And for that reason, if you just take out even 30 of those really bad games, or just increase a little bit of those numbers, a little bit, to where it makes it a little bit more of like an average bad stretch rather than abysmal, this ends up being a much better profile. And so for that reason, with Miguel Amaya being projected at 1.2, I think, yes, he's probably going to play less because Carson Kelly is going to get more. But I think if you can look at Miguel Amaya as a 2.5 WAR player, and they say 83 games, I'm going to go with 100 games. I think he will play 100 games, and I think that Carson Kelly will be probably more at like 65 to 70. I think Miguel Amaya could be a 2.5 WAR player. He was that bad in 2024 for the first half of the season. I just don't think it's possible for him to be that bad at the beginning of the season again. I don't think it's possible. For that reason, 2.5. Do the math, y'all. 1.6 plus 1.6 plus 1.3 of additional WAR brings you to a total of 4.5 WAR, bringing the Cubs to 93.1 wins based on all the WAR calculations, and that is an NL Central winner. It's exciting, right? And it seems feasible to me. Let me know what you think in the comments. Once again, make sure you submit your video of who you think your pick is to click, Kyle@setupman.net. But I did promise you that I would have 3 players that, because of some health reasons last year, might make huge impacts this year on the Cubs and are not currently estimated to be on the 26-man roster. Very simply, this shouldn't surprise anyone. It is Ben Brown, it is Cade Horton, and it is Luke Little. So now 3 pitchers who I believe could combine, because they are at 0 right now because they're not expected to be in the actual 26-man roster. I believe that Ben Brown could and should be a 5th starter for a number of games here in 2025. I think you could easily get 2 WAR out of Ben Brown. Cade Horton, if he is healthy, if he's doing what we saw him do in 2023 and now do that at the major league level, I don't think it's out of this question whether he is a swingman, a bullpen guy, or even maybe a 5th or 6th starter at some point to get another win, maybe even win and a half out of him, depending on when he comes up in the season. And then Luke Little, who was injured for most of last year and has flashed amazing stuff, really has had just 1 or 2 bad outings in his entire career, could be a 1 WAR guy out of the bullpen as well. There you go. 2 plus 1.5 plus 1, that's another 4.5 right there. I think this is within the realm. If those 3 guys can be healthy for the Cubs in 2025, you're looking at a strengthened rotation, a strengthened bullpen, and a really scary back end of the bullpen potentially as well, with maybe either Cade Horton or Luke Little. That's what I got. Who's a player that I didn't mention that you think, based on projections going into 2025, which is all on FanGraphs there, you can go download it, which of them has an even bigger potential to increase? I think Kyle Tucker is out there. I think it would not surprise me if Kyle Tucker had a 4.5 WAR season or had an 8 WAR season. I think that that's absolutely out there. Maybe that's your guy. Let me know. Put it in the comments. Thanks for watching this. I hope that you have a little bit of optimism for the Cubs here in 2025 based on some exceeding expectations. That's going to do it for me here on the Setup Man. I'm going to go put my arm on ice.